All right, good afternoon. My name is Laurance Stuntz, and thank you for all participating in the latest iteration of our Innovations in Caregiving webinar series. So I am the director of the Massachusetts eHealth Institute at the Mass Tech Collaborative, and we're a public economic development agency here in Massachusetts. For those of you who haven't joined one of our webinars in the past, over the past couple of years, we've been working with public and private sector partners to understand and highlight the impact of family caregiving on the overall economy and on the individuals that they care for, and on their jobs and employment status, financial status, financial well-being. And so what we try to do is understand broadly, we've worked with, understand those issues broadly. We've worked closely with employers to launch the Massachusetts Caregiver Coalition. So these are employers whose mission is and basically raise their hands that they want to recognize, honor, and support caregivers within their organizations and help them care for their loved ones while remaining employed. We've also expanded that effort recently into the Mass Caregiving Initiative at the Mass Tech Collaborative. This is an effort that incorporates the employer work, but also adds our work in to sponsor innovation in caregiving, as well as to sponsor a community focus on caregivers and family caregiving. So in the communities aspect, we partner with the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and Mass Home Care and others. And in the innovation arm, we are running this webinar series. We also have recently launched, and Paul will drop into the chat, a federally funded program that is a challenge program looking for solutions to support caregivers as they return from work. But in the meantime, I am super excited today to have a conversation around dementia, caring for those with dementia, and innovative ways that a couple of Massachusetts companies are bringing to the table to support the caregivers of those with dementia. And so we have speakers today from the Alzheimer's Association, from Kinto, and from Seniorlink, and one speaker who's from both the Alzheimer's Association and Kinto. And so to kick off the conversation, I'm going to ask Beth Kallmyer to join me on screen. Beth is the Vice President of Care and Support for the National Alzheimer's Association. She's based in Chicago. And as Vice President of Care and Support, Beth oversees association programs and services nationwide for individuals with Alzheimer's and their families, and for outreach to long-term care professionals. And these services include information and referral through the 24/7 helpline that the association maintains, consumer education workshops, support groups for caregivers, and programming for people with early stage dementia. And Beth also oversees the association's strategy to influence care and long-term services and support program. And so, Beth, thank you very much, first of all, for joining us here. And I wonder if you can sort of kick us off, give us a good understanding of the data that surrounds Alzheimer's and the caregivers and so on. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. So yeah, as Lauren said, I'll be setting the stage around Alzheimer's and its impact on caregivers. So Alzheimer's disease and related dementias are one of the most under-recognized public health issues in our country. There's over 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's and over 11 million people serving as their caregivers. I'm sure many of you in the audience today have been impacted by Alzheimer's in your own families. So not only are there so many people facing Alzheimer's, it's a really complicated disease with a long duration where the person requires more help as the disease progresses. On average, individuals live from 4 to 6 years following a diagnosis, but some can live as long as 20 years. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia and causes loss in cognitive functioning. So in addition to memory loss, which a lot of people think, oh, Alzheimer's is only about memory loss, it also includes losses in executive functioning, judgment, problem solving, all those skills we need in order to take part in our daily lives. It is a progressive disease, and ultimately it's fatal. A lot of people don't understand that it can kill you if something else doesn't, if you don't have some other condition. 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's kills more people than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. So who are the dementia caregivers? We know that approximately 2/3 are women. I'm sure that's not a surprise to our audience. And about 30% are older than 65, which means, 70% are of that working age group. Over half are providing assistance to a parent or an in-law, and 66% of them live with the person in the community. And approximately a fourth are part of the sandwich generation, meaning that they're not only caring for an aging parent, but also for children in the home. So the toll of Alzheimer's is physical, emotional, social, and financial. So when comparing dementia caregivers to other types of caregivers, dementia caregivers experience significantly more stress. The care they provide requires higher physical strain. They anticipate the need for care to last longer, and they're more likely to report their own health has gotten worse due to their care responsibilities. We know that over half of all dementia caregivers have provided care for 4 or more years. So as the disease progresses, the impact on caregivers also increases. In the early stages of dementia, the person might only need reminders and minimal assistance, but as it progresses into the middle and later stages, caregivers often feel as if they're on call 24/7, and in many cases they are. More than 70% of persons living with dementia reside in the community. When it's time to move into a residential care, that's often happening because the caregiver can no longer safely provide care. And typically that's in the later, middle, or later stages. Another challenge is that people living with dementia often experience what we call dementia-related behaviors, things like anxiety, agitation, wandering, hallucinations, delusions. These behaviors are very stressful for a caregiver, and it is challenging to manage them safely when someone is living in the home. So we also note that half of dementia caregivers are employed full-time, and the impact on their employment is significant. 57% of those caregivers reported having to go in late or leave early, and 18% of dementia caregivers reduced their hours due to care responsibilities. So when comparing dementia caregivers to non-dementia caregivers are more likely to take a leave of absence, turn down a promotion, or even stop work entirely. So this is definitely an issue that employers need to be thinking about and caring about. And then finally, the financial cost of Alzheimer's is staggering. In 2021, the cost of care for people living with Alzheimer's to our nation is $355 billion. That's billion with a B. So Alzheimer's is one of the most, if not the most, expensive diseases. And the cost to families is also significant. Medicare does not cover long-term services, so families are paying for those types of services out of pocket. So based on all of this, you can see that caregivers need access to resources and support. So I'm going to turn it back to Laurance so we can hear some more about some innovations to help do just that.
Thanks, Beth. Real quick before you drop off, on that chart, it showed $355 billion in cost of care, and then another $257 billion in terms of the cost, basically the value of the care that unpaid caregivers are providing. I just wanted to check: are those additive, or are those, or
no, they're separate?
They're separate. So it's more than half $500 billion.
Yep. The 355 billion is the cost that is actually paid out, and then that other number is what it would cost if we were paying family caregivers to provide this care.
Okay, so thank you. And it's astounding statistics. One of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation is not to scare everybody, but to make sure that folks are aware. There's a huge percentage of people who will eventually get Alzheimer's or get a form of dementia, and many of us will very likely be caregivers for those folks. So part of what we try to do with this series is highlight innovative solutions that can help support folks and help bring some sanity to this. So I am very pleased to introduce Joe Chung. Joe is the co-founder and CEO of Kinto, which is a technology-scaled care coaching service that supports and trains family caregivers of seniors with Alzheimer's disease. And he's a serial entrepreneur with several successful exits, including Art Technology Groups, one of the first unicorn spinouts from the MIT Media Lab. Joe, welcome. So happy that you could join us this afternoon.
Thanks, Laurance. Really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, can you give us or give the viewers an overview of Kinto? And what one of the things that I find really interesting about this is its history with Red Star and sort of looking for real opportunities, and tell a little bit of that story and what Kinto was founded to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kinto came out of this kind of weird confluence of interests. One was that after ATG, Jeet Singh, my co-founder and best friend, still my co-founder and best friend, co-founder of Kinto, he and I went off on this quest to start basically two new companies. One that we would run each, that we really would care about, get really focused on. And we explored a whole bunch of different ideas and looked at we were trying to look at things from where were the most important socioeconomic friction points and problems that a startup might be able to impact. And the weird coincidence, I got very, very focused on the aging market, and I was struck by this, the massive burden of the informal care system and the fact that it's really completely disconnected from the formal care system. And while I was researching this, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he ended up passing in 2018. And the process was this, really traumatic event for my family. So I got to live this firsthand. As it turned out, both my father and his main caregiver, who was my brother, were both neurosurgeons. So we had this tremendous amount of medical knowledge. They were also the first two angel investors in our technology group. So we had, good financial resources. And what we discovered was that wasn't enough. In fact, it didn't help deal with the emotional impact, the burden, the family dynamics, all the stress and challenge of coordinating all this care for my brother. And I came away from it feeling I really let him down, and started Kinto to try to fix that. So that's kind of our origin story. Wow.
And I actually somehow never knew that about you. We've had dozens of conversations and never knew that. So that is amazing. And I'm glad that something has come out of it. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of what Kinto does? You founded it to help solve this problem, but how do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our infinite conceit, I thought we could solve this. What we want to do, what I really set out to do was to train and support family caregivers so that they could deal with the disease better, and then address this tremendous cost of care. Dementia patients fall at a much higher rate than the non-dementia patients because of the motor degradation that Beth was mentioning. The fact that you lose, it's not just a cognitive thing; it's also your motor skills. They also have many more medication mishaps, not surprisingly, and so their admission, there's a tremendous number of avoidable hospital admissions from dementia patients. Also, the ability to keep somebody at home longer and deal with the tremendous cost of long-term care comes down to the family caregiver's ability to cope. So those two things alone really speak to caregiver interventions, being able to support and train caregivers better. And what we found out pretty quickly was that there really are great models that are already in place that help people do this. And it's really about one-to-one advice, expert coaching, curriculum, being able to teach people things that everyone who is dealing with a dementia patient, who's caring for a dementia patient, really needs to know. And then, support, emotional support. So, there's a huge history of the success of support groups in this country, in the world. What I wanted to do, being a technologist, was scale it. So what we're really doing is we're taking a really well-proven, evidence-driven formula for care coaching and support, and then tech amplifying it, tech scaling it, and that's really what this is about. So we deliver Kinto through an app, and in fact, we start with building trust. I think the thing that we really figured out that was kind of the breakthrough was that, it's really hard for self-service technology. You can't just put an app in the App Store or put, an MIT course up online and expect people to go and consume it themselves by themselves. They need some real motivation and trust and a relationship. So there's a human factor here that just can't be left out. But what we discovered was that we can do a lot of a shot of like upfront trust building. Just one single video call, a 30-minute call with our care coach, establish that relationship, and then move the whole program into our app and be able to communicate with text chat, which is much more scalable and much more efficient, be able to deliver curriculum through the app, and then as importantly, be able to enroll caregivers into an online support group where they can connect with other people, help each other. And it turns out that those three items work incredibly well together. They're sort of self-reinforcing. And for employers, Beth already mentioned the work impacts. I think it's surprising when the more we dig into it, the more we feel that employers need to know how important this is. About 15% of any given employee base is caring for an adult with a serious condition, and Alzheimer's and dementia will be the #1 condition there. The other interesting thing we found out, by the way, is that it's much more closer to 50-50 male to female, partially because so many women have left the workforce during COVID. So it's a more balanced employee base that it impacts more people than most employers probably realize.
So it was really interesting to me to hear about the combination between technology and personalized care coaching and some of the way you kick it off. I wonder actually if now might be a good time to bring Amelia into the conversation and just sort of talk a little bit about that, what that work looks like.
Yeah, so I was super excited that you didn't want to just hear from us, you wanted to hear from one of our actual care coaches. And Amelia is in this really amazing position because she is a licensed therapist, and she is an employee of the Alzheimer's Association. But we've developed this fantastic partnership with Beth and her group to essentially lend us their senior care consultants to work with us as care coaches. So we're kind of learning and exploring this together. But Amelia is the one who's on the front line of our service, and really is both been helping our initial clients, our pilot cohort clients, but also helping us build the service out and really defining what we should be delivering and how we should be delivering it. So I'll pass it over to Amelia Thomley.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having me here. And Joe and Beth, I thought that you spoke so well to the situation that caregivers are in right now. I wanted to mention, because I have been working on the helpline as a care consultant, the helpline on its own, which it's not just phone calls, it is like its own piece of technology in a way, a really elaborate, coordinated organization that helps caregivers right when they need it in the moment. The thing that I've been wanting to work on with Kinto more is, well, then how do we also transition somebody into getting consistent ongoing support that is not, they might have one initial event where they need to talk to someone right away, but then how can they start to take charge of the situation at home and be organized and also get that sense of community and support. And then thinking about that, I was thinking of a couple examples of people that I've been working with. So one person that came to mind was Leslie. It's not her real name, but she is she's living with her husband at home. They've been married for 52 years. And she was in this real place of isolation because she's been noticing he's starting to have trouble driving. And this is a big deal for him because he actually was a professional truck driver. So that really started to stand out as something's going wrong. But she was finding that she couldn't talk to his doctor openly about this. She couldn't talk to her husband openly about this. And so by the time that she downloaded the Kinto app and got set up with a coaching session with me, the place that she could find to be able to speak privately was actually in her car. So we had a 30-minute virtual coaching session in her car, which I thought was really unusual and really spoke to the portability of this technology, that she could take it wherever she could to speak to someone openly about what was going on. And we were able to work on getting her set up with finding a neurologist that hopefully would be able to speak to her openly about brain changes, as well as her husband, and also focus on what are some ways that we can get organized, and also what is working still? What is something that is hopeful about this, even though there's so much chaos going on? What is still something beautiful that you can have in this relationship, which I think is something that a coach can help someone realize. And also the more that you're able to connect with a community of people who are going through the same thing, the more that they also can help you both sort of normalize what you're going through and also pull out those pieces of meaning. For Leslie, it was, her husband still really wanted to hold hands. And so this was something that we could talk about together as a really valuable caregiving tool, which you might not remember to think of on your own. But she's also spoken to me since starting Kinto of being able to read the support group chat. So being able to see what other caregivers are going through, she can read that on her own time. And it's been also helping her to prepare for the future, I think, in a way that just talking to me might not have gotten, all of those different perspectives that she can see what other caregivers are going through. The other big one that came to mind was somebody, Sarah, which is another pseudonym. She was interesting because she is caregiving for her mom at home. And she's a very organized person and was ready to be living with mom, ready to help her, but she wasn't ready for mom to have dementia. And what happened while she was working with us at Kinto is that she actually had an incident where she woke up at 2 a.m. and it turned out mom had left the house already. She had no idea mom had left the house in like a state of confusion, and then was knocking on the door trying to get back in the home. And I wasn't available at that time, but Sarah decided to chat her support group through the app. And there were other caregivers who were awake at that time and were able to provide her emotional support with this totally unexpected, surprising event that she didn't know would happen with mom. And it was wonderful to hear. She was so grateful after that, for the presence of that community for her. So those are a couple examples, really beautiful stories, I think, of, so far how the app is really helping people.
Thanks, Amelia. And it's always great to hear stories of, that's a perfect combination of technology with the personal touch and the caregiving support that you can provide. You can coach somebody like Leslie through, just sort of get her head around all the different things that she could be thinking about, while also having a technology that supports, sorry, Sarah, I forget whether it was what her pseudonym was, the second one, but obviously you're unlikely to be available at 2 a.m. So that's great to hear. We'll come back to you as part of the panel, but I think now would be a good time to introduce Katie Tardiff. Katie is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Operations and Support at Seniorlink, which is another tech-enabled healthcare services company focused on keeping care in the home, where family caregivers obviously play a pivotal role. and Katie is passionate about providing person-centered care for older adults. One of the things I thought was really interesting is that as part of that, you've led Seniorlink's Caregiver Homes product to becoming the first organization in the US awarded the 3-year accreditation status for case management with long-term services and supports distinction, which is awarded by NCQA and their program recognizing an organizational excellence in coordinating quality patient-focused care. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, Katie, was first to talk about Seniorlink, talk about what you do, but also talk about a little bit about a pilot that you could complete, also Seniorlink completed with a health plan and Alzheimer's Association caring for Alzheimer's patients. So I'll leave it to you to introduce it.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurance. It's an honor to share the virtual stage with you all this afternoon and such an important topic. I'm one of those people who has been personally affected by the disease, as Beth, you noted earlier, and Joe, you've experienced as well. My father succumbed to frontotemporal lobar dementia at the young age of 63. So I was one of those working family caregivers through my 20s and also became a geriatric NP during that time, providing clinical care in the long-term care setting. So definitely appreciate the stories you just told, Amelia, and what that feels like as a family caregiver, going through that process of cognitive decline and also just seeing the impact it has on the family and the extended family. So I couldn't agree more that we have a great opportunity to innovate here as it relates to programming. And Joe, to your point, extend the reach with leveraging technology so that we can support families along this caregiving journey. And what really resonated with me, Amelia, as you were talking, was that aspect of the longitudinal nature of this relationship and that the decline it goes on for a long time, and we see those behaviors pop up and be really just challenging and disruptive, and then something new comes down the road as the decline continues. So such an important aspect of the work that we do. We know the role of the family caregiver is critical in dementia care, and that family caregiver is most proximate to the changes that are happening in the home. And we seek to engage the caregiver at Seniorlink in order to drive better care and outcomes for those individuals. So we try to keep care at home through services, support, and technology that engages the family caregiver to provide care to complex individuals. And we do this through that blend of human touch and technology. So we have care team members, nurses and care managers, as well as coaches. And our technology is our communication and collaboration app, VIII. And this blend really helps us offer the caregiver the support they need through that trajectory. We have 20 years experience doing the work, and we've partnered with government partners and health plans to deliver home-based solutions where care managers are going into homes, as well as remote coaching solutions that focus on that family-centered planning and support. So I think we've heard these themes through, Joe, your comments, and Amelia, around the importance of balancing human touch and technology, that relationship is really central. And with that relationship, we really can't forget the empathy and what the experience is of the caregiver going through this process. But also critical to build a system that focuses on the needs and wants of the caregiver and making it easy so that they get the support that they need and when they need it. So with those principles in mind and our experience working with family caregivers, we designed a remote coaching program specifically around supporting caregivers with supporting caregivers of individuals who are living with dementia. So in this program, and I'll just speak very briefly to the pilot, Laurance, we use a remote coach to engage a group of caregivers. We did this pilot actually in Indiana in our home-based care management program. So these families were already in our care management model, and then we applied a dementia care coach to that that care team. And we designed a dementia care curriculum that was founded in the evidence base to cover 4 key content areas that we felt were really critical in supporting the family caregiver. And those were dementia foundations. So, what is dementia? What is happening with mom's brain, and why is it causing the things that I'm seeing? Communicating with the person with dementia, caregiver self-care, and challenging dementia behaviors. And we structured the approach to content delivery in a way that ensured efficiency and repeatability for the coach. So we wanted to make sure that we were really providing a consistent experience across all of the caregivers who were participating. Joe, you mentioned the fall rates in individuals with dementia being high, and medication management challenges. We felt certainly that the foundational content that I just described was really critical in ensuring caregiver support around dementia, but also wanted to make sure coaches were equipped with supplemental information around things like falls, hospitalization use, averting ED utilization, and talking about advanced directives, because those experiences are different for people living with dementia. And we know that there's a lot of complexity beyond the diagnosis that needs to be addressed. So really wanted to take a holistic approach to the content delivery. And so we delivered all of that through the application. We have a similar belief that relationship building at the front end is so critical. And so actually the first interaction is telephonic, but after that, the majority of the communication is happening right in the app through asynchronous messaging, sharing of content, and also critical delivery of questionnaires so that we can gather insights from the caregiver as to how they're doing, as well as how the person they're caring for is doing, so that we have structured and unstructured data to guide that experience on an ongoing basis and to flag for risk that's changing in the home. And the aim there is really to make sure we're mitigating that risk as best as possible so that we can help that person stay home as long as they can.
That's really interesting. I wonder actually if all the other panelists can also come up, and we'll sort of conduct the rest of the conversation as sort of a conversation among us, because I'm really struck by the fact that both Seniorlink and Kinto have landed on this technology-enabled, technology scaling model for the evidence-based, the human connections. As folks are listening to this, we should have time at the end for some Q&A from the audience. So please drop those in the Q&A function, and I'll moderate that at the end of the conversation. But Katie, maybe we can start with you and just sort of drill in a little bit to, okay, here's what you did in the pilot, right? Well, did it matter?
Sure.
What were the outcomes that you found in terms of impact on caregivers and impact on the care recipient, the individual with dementia?
Absolutely. I'm happy to do so. And I think what's really interesting to note is the program was originally designed to be a face-to-face model in the home setting. And we did a lot of build. We collaborated with Northeastern University and the Education Development Center and built an evidence-based program that involved a coach going into a home and doing some pretty intensive coaching and training with the caregiver. But we knew this wouldn't have the reach we were hoping for, and it's very intensive. So we took that model, we took the content and redesigned it into the remote coaching model that I described earlier. And this was our biggest opportunity and our biggest innovation. The question was, could we engage caregivers in a remote way in talking about the things that we hope to talk about? And could a relationship be developed? So that question that we talked about earlier, that would allow for content sharing and the support that was needed. Our strategy was seeking to understand whether we could enhance caregiver activation. And we define that by the sum of knowledge about dementia care and confidence and ability to provide that care as reported by the caregiver, and whether we could do that in a virtual environment. Our theory, of course, was that activation matters, and we know that there's ample evidence that individuals with higher levels of activation have improved health outcomes. So we predicted that if we could influence activation, we would be able to influence health-related outcomes. We also, important to identify satisfaction related to all of this as well. So I'll talk about that. But as a result, and you can see the outcomes here on the slide, we demonstrated a 27% increase in activation, and that was comprised of individual increases in knowledge and confidence from before and after the pilot. And also wanted to share, of course, that caregivers were very satisfied with their experience, 80% reporting extremely satisfied and 85% extremely likely to recommend. And then for coinciding with that data is the demonstrated 56% reduction in ER visits and 21% reduction in unplanned hospitalizations. And that's from the 6 months pre. So we were fortunate to have these individuals in our program, longitudinally. So could look back before program implementation and then measured for the last 6 months of the pilot. So certainly critical. As we think about the progressive nature of the disease and the multiple comorbidities that go along with it, that we were pleased to be able to demonstrate those results.
That's really interesting, and thanks. What I'm struck by is what seems like quite a large 21% decrease in hospitalization from a monetary amount. It
Sure.
becomes a very large amount, and obviously with a population that is growing, that can be quite significant. Paul, I wonder if we might take down the slides, and thanks. And I just want to talk a little bit about, as maybe Amelia, this would be a good question for you as somebody sort of in this coaching role. How does beyond the coaching, how does connecting caregivers to people with similar experience, how does it help them? What's the benefit to the caregiver themselves?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think there's so many potential answers to that question. But to me, the one of the things that really stands out is, so my background is dementia caregiving specifically, and I think that's it's a specific type of situation to be in, where a lot of what people seem to be experiencing day to day can be somewhat surreal. That they might not have ever known that it's possible for these things to happen, that the brain can deteriorate in this kind of way that, you might forget the word for like an everyday item like a cup, but at the same time still be able to remember how to ride a bike, and why would that be the case? And it can feel like it's isolating and just strange to I think experience to watch someone go through these changes. And I think, that's one thing to have a professional come in and talk to you about it. I think, of course, that's going to be helpful. But at the same time, I don't think you can really replace the feeling of sort of togetherness and reassurance that you can get from knowing there's somebody who is going through this exact same thing with their loved one right now. This strange and surreal thing that is scary to me and makes me scared of, what's also going on in my own brain, is also something that somebody else is experiencing at this moment. And I think I don't think you can say enough about having that kind of understanding, which is like a shared, human understanding of, this is how our brains work, and this is what it's like to watch someone go through this disease, and they're doing it with me right now.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and I think gets to something that I feel sort of on the outside, that I think there's often a stigma felt by caregivers of folks with dementia, mental health generally, and dementia. I wonder, Beth, if you might talk a little bit about the association's experience. Like, how does that stigma exist? Is there something that we can do to help combat that stigma, and how does that impact caregivers?
Yeah, so Unfortunately, stigma is still a problem. I do think it's gotten better. There's been more awareness about the disease, and when you get diagnosed, you're not automatically in a nursing home, for example, right? People live in those early stages for many years. But I think we're kind of like cancer in the 50s when people wouldn't say it, they would whisper it. And so the more people that stand up and talk about it, when we have the Pat Summits and the Glenn Campbells coming out and saying, I have this disease and I'm still playing music, or I'm still coaching basketball, or I'm still living my life, that's helpful. And then, what I tell people when I talk to them, because, I started in the helpline where Amelia was many years ago. And so I still do care consultations on the side with all my friends because I'm of a certain age. And, I say, you got to talk about it, even if the person isn't comfortable, because again, their brain's not working quite right. But I encourage families to have conference calls together or Zoom calls now, to talk about what's going on, because that, to Amelia's point, that normalizes things, and you can be on the same team together. So I think we still have a ways to go with dementia, but I think we're in a much better place. But really getting it out in the open and remembering it's a disease. This is not somebody acting not right, or people get embarrassed when they're out in public with somebody living with this disease. We have to remember it's a disease like any other. Nobody's embarrassed to say they have cancer anymore, for the most part. Nobody's embarrassed to say they have heart disease. And I think we need to get to that place. And one other thing I would comment on is, I do think that people are worried at work, all those people that are probably dealing with this that Joe talked about. I do think that people are worried. They don't feel bad saying my kid's sick, I got to stay home, or I got to work from home. But I think it's not quite the same to say, I'm also caring for a parent living with dementia and I need to be here today. Things aren't going well. So hopefully employers will pay attention to this and think about how they can, support their employees in a way that's meaningful. It's not just about childcare, right?
Yeah, well, that's actually, it's like you took the tagline right from the Massachusetts Caregiver Coalition. Our mantra is around recognizing those family caregivers that they are having, and helping them to recognize that they themselves are caregivers. Sometimes that's a challenge. Although I think if you're caring for someone with dementia, you probably recognize that. But and then honoring them and then supporting them. And I think, part of what we're trying to do broadly with talking about family caregiving as an economic issue is to really create a bottom line for this. And I wonder if, Joe, you mentioned briefly the 15% of employees are caregivers, and dementia care is often one of the highest. I wonder if you might elaborate a little bit on those statistics and sort of what you're seeing as you talk to employers about where they can see an impact of supporting their caregivers.
Yeah, no, and I think that that stigma is much more pronounced in the workplace, because it's hard to say, hey, I'm going to be more distracted, or it's hard to step forward and admit to the fact that you might be struggling with something, and dementia has its own additional challenges in that regard. But I think one of the, it's not just the hours. The average caregiver spends 20 hours a week, so it's take what, if you're a caregiver, it's 1,000 hours, a lot of which is going to take place during the workday, because a lot of caregiving isn't necessarily the physical act of cooking meals or cleaning or bathing. It's looking after someone's finances, it's talking to doctors, it's doing a lot of this coordination role that family caregivers are forced to do. And a huge amount of that, half of that, has to take place during work hours, because that's when the doctor's offices are open, that's when the bank is open, that's when you're talking to people. So I think what employers can do, first of all, is recognize that this is real. And I think COVID has kind of broken a wall there, because we're looking into each other's houses now, and you see the impact that family life has on work life. I think it's also I think they can do things about it. You know, we're piloting Kinto as an employee benefit. We're focused primarily on the employee market right now, or the employer market. So we're trying to figure out how we can not just acknowledge and help the employee, which is great, but actually help fix some of the problem, give people the knowledge, the confidence, the agency, so that they're spending less time and less mind share on caregiving and can be more productive. And, you know, just being mercenary about it, obviously an employer is not going to provide a benefit to their employees if it's not generating a return on investment. But the other thing I'll also mention is that there's a real equity issue here as well, and something that I think employers need to be aware of and recognize, that culturally different ethnic groups, the burden of caregiving is highly unequal. Hispanics and African Americans spend much more time caregiving, and the caregiving is much more prevalent than in the white families. As you were talking about financial impact before, on average, and this is from AARP research in caregiving across ethnicities, the out-of-pocket expense that we were talking about before, on average for a white family, is about 14% of net income. For an Hispanic family, it's 44%. It's just this massive disparity in terms of how that impacts your life. And of course, we all know in the employee world that financial problems are one of the biggest drivers of stress, of distraction, of need for intervention. But also, these things pass, they change. Planning and counseling and good help can really alleviate these things. So they're not permanent situations. They are temporary situations that an employer can really step forward and help alleviate.
It's really interesting. And it's also interesting so if I understand correctly, where Kinto thinks that there's a business in this, this is sort of a weird conversation, right? Because supporting caregivers is it's a moral imperative. It should be, and also, we see it as supporting caregivers improves the health of the caregiver themselves. Caregivers are much more likely to have clinical depression, are much more likely to have chronic health conditions, and all of that increases sort of broad costs. So there's an employer piece of it. Kinto is piloting, working with employers and trying to offset that and show that there's a return there. There have been a couple of questions in the chat, and I wonder if Katie, you can just comment on a little bit more about how Seniorlink, my understanding is the people you're supporting as caregivers may not even be your members or the people you serve. Why does it make sense, and who ultimately is funding that work?
Sure. So there's different answers to that question, but we collaborate with government payers, state Medicaid agencies to provide services for Medicaid eligible individuals. And part of the program requirements then are that there's a available caregiver who is providing that daily care and support, and that individuals, those caregivers are paid a daily stipend to provide that care. And so that's one example. Another example is in the Medicare Advantage space or managed care space, where the managed care member is the individual with dementia, but again, supporting that individual's family caregiver to deliver on those outcomes that we talked about earlier, that are important from a quality of life perspective, helping that individual stay at home longer and in the community, but also with a focus on mitigating risks and reducing those adverse events from happening.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I also like to point out with this, and one of the reasons why we have multiple sort of innovation solutions on a webinar like this is to point out that there are different models, different beneficiaries, and with something as large as family caregiving or dementia care, there are lots of opportunities to help and save money to different pieces of the system. One question, since they are both tech, we talked about, moving things online. A question came in the chat and said, many caregivers are older, not able to use apps. So what's your experience? And maybe this is a broad question, but yeah, I hear this a lot. Well, my mom's really old and doesn't want to use her phone or something. So how do you respond, or what's your experience with that? And maybe I'll start with Joe, and I'm sure there's different. Everybody's sort of perked up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge issue, obviously, and not all the population even has a computer or has a smartphone, although smartphones are more prevalent. For our target market right now for large employers as employee benefit, it's not really much of an issue because we're targeting companies where their employees are almost certainly going to be using apps and app enabled in that regard. But we are doing larger cohort pilots now, and we do have Amelia. I don't know who our oldest caregiver is. I'm not sure if you know their exact age, but I would think, I don't know what the number is, but
in their 80s.
Yeah. I think COVID has also helped a lot. It's forced a lot of seniors to do telehealth calls and communicate with their families when everyone's on lockdown. So I think the versatility with technology has grown quite a bit in the senior ages. But yeah, I think so hopefully we've kind of crossed a certain threshold there where things are easier. But it's definitely a legitimate concern. Some of our initial work with a caregiver is mainly like getting them to get the app installed properly and stuff, for sure.
Yeah,
well, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Just to quickly add on to that, I mean, for the people who I have been able to, part of coaching has been coaching on technology, and for some people it's worked really well. So that's been extremely empowering for people to then become used to using the app. And so I have seen people who were very confused in the beginning get used to it and then get a lot out of the service. So I think it's shown me personally that this is possible. I didn't know that.
There's something to be said for that personal aspect of it, right? That if you're just asking a senior to use an app and nobody's there and their grandkid isn't there showing them how to do it or whatever, then that's when they have challenges. But if they have someone that they can talk to about it and help them download it and tell them what to do next, and then they practice, there's something helpful in terms of that to getting to that audience.
Certainly. And we've had a very similar experience in that even those who may have resisted at first, once they get connected and start experiencing the value, and that's really important aspect too, is delivering high value early so that they engage with the program and, start to experience the benefits and then want to keep coming back. And Beth, that point around personalization is really critical as well, and knowing that there's somebody on the other end to respond to those needs. We also, looked to the research when we were designing not just the program but the technology, and there's a MeHI report around caregivers and the tech, but truly, the outcome of that report indicates that caregivers are they have interest in tech and they have little fear in using it. And I think that's consistent with the experience that we've had in operating this program. They want to have communication and collaboration with their care team. They want reliable information and help finding it. And they want a place to store this information over time. And I think the value of keeping it really simple is important, and, drives that engagement so that you can have that relationship over time.
Yeah, and we'll drop in the chat and in the follow-up link to the report that we did a few years ago, actually, related to caregiver attitudes about digital health technology and use of technology and what they were most interested in and so on. I think some of that is still relevant. I am amazed at the number of questions that we're not going to be able to get to that have popped up into the chat and in the Q&A. So what we will try to do is answer the ones that we can, maybe pull some of these as fodder for a future webinar. But if I tried to answer these, we would be here for another 2 hours. Obviously, this has been really interesting. Just to close out, and I didn't tell you guys I was going to ask this question, so hopefully it won't surprise. What are you most excited about in terms of innovation in supporting, folks who care for those with dementia. And Beth, I'm going to put you on the spot first, and you just sort of go round robin quickly and just talk about, what's coming that gets you really excited innovation-wise in this area.
Well, not having thought about it deeply, but I can tell you that I'm super excited about the work that we're doing with Kinto, because it is, we have a helpline, we offer those services, but it's an intensive service and it's expensive. And how do you find a way to scale it? And that's, getting people access to personalized services is a challenge. And so that's one of the things I love about this type of technology, is it gives people access in a way that is more scalable.
That's really cool. Katie, what are you most excited about?
I'm excited about how the model just keeps evolving to get better at this. And so, we learn so much every time we do a pilot, whether, with different partners. And one of the things that we're learning a lot about is some, capabilities around delivery of content that we think is going to matter in a scalable and more automated way, and layering on the personalization on top of that. So we're gaining efficiencies, but also making sure that we're meeting those very personalized needs and addressing the one-on-one as well. So I'm excited about the opportunity to scale and to keep leveraging the tech to do that in an efficient way.
Joe.
So I came to MIT when I was 17 and started following Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of artificial intelligence, and studied that, which actually got me over to the Media Lab, weirdly enough. And I'm most excited about the potential to use AI and intelligent machine intelligence to amplify that human touch and amplify that human connection both. So I think, my first take on this was we're going to do this all with technology, and we'd have chatbots, and you'd be talking to a robot. And I learned the hard way that that's just never going to work. And most importantly, by working with Beth and Amelia, I saw the unbelievable value of just unreproducible value of having that human empathy and that human touch. So for me, I'm most excited about taking that and just further amplifying that, especially in helping people work with each other in a more, right now, Amelia spends a fair amount of time watching the support groups, facilitating them, kind of helping them along. And I think that's an area where we can do a lot of that in a more automated fashion, but still retain all the real authenticity of the human to human interactions. So that's what I'm excited about.
Cool. And Amelia, does that excite you as well, or?
No, I think all of the above is really exciting to me. I mean, I think this might be going a little too broad, but like for me personally, I feel like facing dementia care for all of us is something that sort of stops you in your tracks and is really terrifying in a lot of ways. And when you say, well, actually, there is something that you can do here, that there is things that we don't even know how much we could help caregivers yet, because we don't even know what kinds of technologies we could build to help make this work and help people stay at home, help people find meaning, help people connect to each other. I find all of that extremely exciting and hopeful. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you all. I guess I'm most excited by the fact that we have lots of really smart people working on these challenges. And I think, not to toot Massachusetts horn, but that I will do it. We have all the ingredients of a great ecosystem to solve or at least address. I don't know that we're going to solve every problem, but we have technology minds, we have healthcare minds, we have scientists, we have all of the pieces of the puzzle to support this. And I'm really excited to track that, to encourage the growth of that. I want to thank our panelists. This has been great. The time flew by instantaneously. I want to ask folks who are in this, there will be a little poll that pops up afterwards. Please do answer it. We'd like to know sort of whether this was interesting and what other future topics you might want to see. Typically, we announce our next webinar at the close of the previous one, but this time we're skipping August because it is summertime, and I think a lot of us are recovering from the pandemic and wanting to spend a little time. So we will be back with one of these innovation webinars in October, and there will be webinars from the Caregiver Coalition in September and November. So look forward to those. We will send out some notes and thank all of you, and hold your loved ones tight.